Good afternoon, all from Bahrain. I'm Harish Gopinath, Head of Family Business and Private Enterprise for the Middle East and South Asia region. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, and fellow colleagues, a warm welcome. And it's our honor and pleasure at KPMG to host this Middle East and South Asia Family Business webinar. I'm sure many of you have attended our last Family Business Conference, which was physically held in Dubai during February 2020. The purpose of such family business events is to bring together family businesses and experts from the region and across the globe to share their insights and understand their perspective of the various challenges and opportunities they face. It is also an excellent platform to network, which hopefully once everything settles down, we are looking forward to hosting a physical event. We understand that family businesses are the backbone of our economies and contribute significantly towards GDP, and they also employ a substantial portion of the global workforce. The core qualities of family businesses that unites them is their deep-rooted purpose and values, and they also exhibit strong resilience and is in their DNA. This distinguishes them from other businesses. The immediate shock on family businesses during this pandemic was on revenues and supply chain disruption, and they took immediate action. Initially, their reactions were reactive, and later on, it became more proactive. So to understand the impact of the pandemic on family businesses and their strategies, KPMG, in collaboration with the STEP Project Global Consortium, conducted a global family business survey. The survey covered more than 3,000 families from across 75 countries, representing multiple family generations and industries. I would now like to share this short video for the survey.
Family businesses come in all shapes and sizes. They produce more than 75% of GDP in most countries worldwide and employ more than 75% of their global workforce. The qualities that unite them: deep-rooted purpose, values, and resilience. In collaboration with the STEP Project Global Consortium, KPMG Private Enterprise surveyed 3,010 business leaders in companies of all sizes in 75 countries, representing multiple family generations and industries. To help us learn from their experiences and share their insights, we've developed personas of 4 family business types. These bring to life 3 core strategies that we identified are adopted in different combinations as business families prepared for a comeback: social responsibility, business transformation, and exercising patience. Through the 4 personas in the report, we can delve deeper into what these strategies meant in practice for businesses, whether they are led by a family or non-family CEO, and whether the shares are owned by a few family members or many across several generations. Balancing the immediate and long-term impacts of the pandemic, family businesses have proved extraordinary ability to act and adapt quickly. There are lessons to be learned from all of these experiences. Now is the time for every family business to evaluate their own actions and implement the changes necessary to keep family businesses moving forward as the engine of the global economy.
Today, we will start this webinar with a keynote address from our Global Head of Family Business, and we will also discuss the findings from the Global Family Business Survey under the theme Mastering a Comeback and How Family Businesses are Triumphing Over COVID-19. We will then have a panel session with eminent panelists from the region and from other countries. The main topics during this panel session will be the future of work, transformation and diversification, social responsibility, governance and succession planning. We've also seen a huge rise in the prominence of ESG, that's environment, social and governance framework, which is being reinforced as a value driver. And we will also learn from some of our panelists how they have started implementing such strategies in their business. As far as instructions for the participants are concerned during the webinar, please feel free to ask questions by using the chat box function. We kindly request all participants to complete the feedback form at the end of the session, and please note that this webinar is being recorded. With that, I would like to welcome our Global Head of Family Business, Tom McGuinness, for the keynote address. Tom is based out of UK and has worked with several large family companies and was closely involved with the Global Family Business Survey. I would also like to welcome Anurag Bajpai, who is the Head of Family Business and Private Enterprise based in UAE, to discuss the findings of the survey report from a regional perspective. Anurag has rich experience working and advising large family businesses in the region. Welcome, Tom and Anurag.
Thank you very much, Harish, and thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm especially delighted to be able to present it with my friend and colleague Anurag from Dubai. So, as Harish mentioned, this is called Mastering a Comeback. And really, it's about the resilience and purpose of family businesses and how they can put themselves in the position to lead the economic recovery following COVID. Now, as Harish mentioned, we did this survey in conjunction with the STEP project, and we asked our respondents two key questions. Are family businesses as uniquely resilient and adaptable as we believe them to be? And why are they able to outperform others in navigating successfully through a major crisis such as a global pandemic? Now, Harish mentioned two particularly key attributes of family business. One is their strong sense of purpose, which I think plays to their community, but also their resilience. Now, in terms of the context of the survey, we had over 3,000 respondents, and you'll note from here we had about 2,500 family businesses, but just over 500 non-family businesses, because we wanted another group to be able to benchmark the results against. And 16% of those respondents came from the Middle East and African region, which is a really good percentage. And on the right-hand side there, you can see that we have a really good spectrum of the generations, a high percentage of the first and second generation, lowering to the third and the fourth, but still a good representation from that next generation coming through. And then just moving on to the next slide, which talks about the impact of COVID on family businesses globally. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see the impact on the global stage. So quite a small percentage where revenue stayed the same, a very small percentage where revenue increased, only 9%, and of course, 69% where the revenue decreased. And I think it's very interesting to compare those results to the results for Middle East and Africa, where you can see that actually a much higher percentage of family businesses saw their revenue decreased during the pandemic. And I think this is a really significant point, and some of the details surrounding this will now be covered by my friend Anurag as he talks through some of the detail of the results. Anurag, over to you, please.
Findings from our global business survey. In this slide, we look at some of the financial actions taken by family businesses to mitigate the shock that the pandemic was having on their business. The financial actions that family businesses took were largely around overall cost-cutting measures, but also there were some other critical business essential actions or decisions taken by business families in the initial few months. The uniqueness about business families is the fact that they have economic goals plus also non-economic goals. But the first few months of the pandemic for family businesses were all about stabilizing the business and prioritizing their economic goals, their survival. What we see from the survey findings, four broad areas of financial action. First and foremost, it was about reducing employee costs. 36% of the businesses globally focused on employee cost reduction. Then came an overall general cost reduction across different parts of the business. But also there were other measures taken by families. 14% families globally looked at actions like deferring their costs, deferring investments, restructuring some of their payments. Interestingly, another area that came up through the survey was regarding executive or top management compensation. Some businesses also looked at aligning compensation. This was especially true for larger, well-established businesses where you had non-family CEOs. Now, we've spoken about the global findings. When we look at the region, similar findings, similar percentages across these 4 areas. And these 4 areas continue to be what families are focusing on in the region also. So moving on to the next slide. So while there was general consistency in the financial actions taken by business families around the world, there were some interesting similarities, dissimilarities between specific areas of focus. So say, for example, when we look at employee costs, globally, moving employees to a remote working status was the most popular action taken by business families. So globally, about 46% of the workforce that works for family businesses moved to a remote working status. However, when we look at the region, which is Middle East and Africa, reducing employee pay was the most commonly used action by business families in the region. Similarly, when we look at overall cost reduction in the business, reducing office expenses across the board, and this is true for all the regions, came out as the most popular action taken by families. About 60% of family businesses looked at reducing office expenses. But also on the chopping board came their marketing spend. 50% of family businesses looked at reducing their marketing spend. Also areas like inventory carrying costs. About 30% of families looked at inventory carrying cost, the value of inventory they were carrying, to reduce their cost. Interestingly, what families also did was to look at other actions. Right in the region, renegotiating vendor contracts was a very popular or a commonly used action by business families. So that was true for this region, but also for Europe. But when you look at some of the other regions, when you look at the Asia Pacific or the Americas, delaying supplier payments was very popular, more popular than renegotiating vendor contracts. So we see an interesting similarity and uniqueness in different regions in the actions that they'd used. Moving on to the next slide. On this slide, we look at some interesting numbers as far as employment is concerned. So in the initial weeks or months of the pandemic, employment was one area where a lot of family business management were focusing on. But however, when we look at the global numbers, we found out that family businesses did a lot better than their non-family peers in protecting people's employment. So globally, in family business employment, there was a reduction of 8.5%, whereas their non-family peers, there was a reduction of 10.24%. So family businesses can pat themselves on the back because they did a much better job in protecting people's employment. Again, it goes back to the core value of some of these family businesses. But how was saying that when we look at the different regions, we see a significant variance. So when we look at a region like the Middle East and Africa, which is our region here, there was a 20% reduction in employment. Whereas in some of the other regions, when you look at a region like Europe, the reduction in family business employment was a lot lesser at 4.3%. And I think largely this is because of the fact that obviously the state of the economy in different parts of the world was different, but also on account of employment protection laws in certain countries. So if you move on to the next slide. One of the other areas that we saw as an increased focus for family businesses was we saw a higher level of involvement and input from the family business members in the family business. We saw with a number of businesses, the family re-engaging with the business. And this is especially true for businesses where the management was not from the family. And I saw that with a number of my clients in the region, where I, especially with the second or the third generation, I saw them, the few months after the pandemic, come back to the business. They were more engaged in the discussions that were happening within the business. Historically, what we've seen in the region with the second and third generation, a number of family members have their own side businesses, and a lot of their time is spent focusing on their side businesses. But I saw that change. I saw the family coming together. There was more communication within the family. I think the whole family was closer to what was happening with the business to facilitate faster decision making. What we also saw was some of the senior members of the family coming back to the business. These family members had an historical context to what was happening with the business, and they were there in a way to ensure that the family's purpose was protected, their values were protected. But what we also saw was, and I mentioned this earlier, with the younger generation, we also saw in some cases the younger generation being given more responsibilities. So a number of members of the younger generation of the family business were involved in helping to find digital solutions to streamline business operations. We saw younger generations looking at developing new products, new services, and also trying to explore new markets, trying to help diversify the business. What we also saw with family businesses was, Rene, maybe you go back to the previous slide. What we also saw with family businesses was the family also got involved with collaborating with external stakeholders. So collaborating with suppliers, with customers, with other external stakeholders, trying to identify problems, find a solution, and trying to focus on greater social issues. And when we look at different geographic regions, we see an interesting similarity with certain regions. So when you look at a region like Middle East and Asia Pacific, we saw the family more involved with dealing with external stakeholders. Whereas when you look at a region like the Americas, we see the family more involved with internal processes, decision making, and internal engagement. Rene, if you can go to the next slide. So after the initial shock of the pandemic, and when families had managed to stabilize their business, we saw families focus on three core strategies to help them navigate through the chaos and the uncertainty, but also to get their business ready for the new reality. So we saw family businesses focus on social responsibility. So increasing awareness from family businesses to the needs of the society, to the community they were working in. We also saw business transformation as a key component of family business strategy. And this was both a combination of reactive pivoting the first few months, where businesses were looking at new strategies to survive, but also reactive or rather proactive pivoting, where businesses were looking at new opportunities, new approaches, new ways of doing work. And again, I see that with a lot of my clients in the region, where increasingly they're looking at diversification. So one real learning for a number of businesses in the region was we need to diversify our business. A lot of businesses realized they had too much focus on one or a few lines of business, and to mitigate the risk, they were looking at diversifying. The other interesting outcome of the pandemic that I'm seeing with my clients is divestment. So I see with smaller businesses, they being open to getting in an outside shareholder to help them scale the business, to give them the necessary ammunition to take the business to the next level. But what I also see with some of the older legacy family business is this whole structuring of the business between core and non-core businesses, with the philosophy that I want to stay in a core business, but I want to divest from a non-core business. So again, very interesting developments within the business transformation space. Also, a number of family businesses looked at exercising patience, right? What they did was to use their patience capital and look at the developments happening around them in their company, also within their industry, and take their time to make their next step and not do anything in a hurry. Interestingly, two other findings, and this speaks to the business transformation agenda and unique with family businesses. So again, from the survey, we found out that a family business was 42% more likely to go on a business transformation journey than a non-family business. Again, I think it speaks to the adaptability and the agility of family business. But also, we found out that if you have a multi-generation family business, there's a 45% more chance of the business going down a business transformation strategy than a single generation business. With this, I'll hand over to Tom, and Tom possibly will take us through these three strategies in a little more detail. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Anurag. So just a few words on each of these. Anurag provided some really good client examples. So in terms of social responsibility, I just really wanted to mention two things which I'm seeing coming through from my clients very clearly. One is a great focus on the ESG agenda, and it would be interesting to hear from people on the audience whether their businesses are focused on that, very much about sustainability and the environment. And the other area is on philanthropy, charitable giving in order to protect communities. Then on the business transformation strategy, just to give you some concrete examples, many of my clients are investing in technology because the way forward is to have reliable data that allows you to make strategic decisions. And I was quite surprised at the beginning of the pandemic when many of my clients were not able to give a clear view on either working capital or forecasting cash, which of course is critical in the early months of the pandemic. So I think investing in technology and data is incredibly helpful. And then lastly, on exercising patience, as Anurag said, this is about not making a knee-jerk reaction, taking time to consider all the factors and relying on the fact that the legacy of the family and the future of the next generation is more important. So just hand you back to Anurag for some final comments on the preferred regional strategies, please.
Thanks, Tom. So on this slide, we again building up on the three business strategies we saw family businesses exercise, and we see some differences between regions. So when we look at Middle East and Africa, the most popular strategy for family businesses was exercising patience. Let's not take any hurried decision. Let's understand what's happening with the market, with the industry, and then let us take our time to decide what to do next. I think it talks about maybe the risk-averse nature of a number of businesses. They wanted to wait and watch. However, when we look at some of the other regions, and when you look at a region like the Americas, the most popular strategy there was business transformation. Similarly, with Europe, it was social responsibility. So again, different regions, different preferences. But what we also saw with a number of family businesses, that while or during the course of the pandemic, this strategy changed a few times, right? So over the 6 or 7 months, we did see, the initial few months, family businesses focusing on social responsibility. Then maybe they may focus on exercising patience, and then finally move on to working on a business transformation agenda. Tom, I'll hand it over to you to conclude.
Thank you, Anurag. So just to conclude, just to remind you of the questions that we asked the survey at the very beginning, And I think you will agree that we've demonstrated how family businesses are in a great position to lead that economic recovery. And just a personal comment from me, literally about 3 weeks before the pandemic began, I had the pleasure of presenting at a conference in Saudi Arabia with Fuad Chapra, and then again in Dubai for my friends at MESA. And I was really impressed with the energy and the passion and the commitment of family businesses. And I see those businesses thriving, I'm sure, as the pandemic comes to a close. So thank you again for allowing us to present. And now I'll hand you back to the chairman, Harish.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Harish.
Tom.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Anurag, for sharing those great insights from the COVID-19 survey. With that, now I would like to introduce you all to the panel session. The panel moderator for the day is Daniel Tremaki, who is part of our Global Family Business and Center of Excellence based out of Canada, and he'll be moderating the panel sessions. Daniel has been instrumental and worked very closely with the team of on the Global Family Business Survey. And briefly to introduce you to the panel speakers for the day we have Nizam Kala, who's the Managing Director from Amka Products from South Africa. We have Fazal Fawaz, Director, Avarna Ventures Private Limited from Sri Lanka. We have Mohammad Abdullah Al-Fahim, the Group Head of Business Development from the Al-Fahim Group. And we have Mohammad Batterjee, who is the Managing Director of the Batterjee Pharma, and he is a board member of the Batterjee Holding Saudi Arabia. So welcome, Daniel, and the panel speakers.
Thank you, Harish. It's great to be here. And again, I think just building off many of the comments from Anurag and from Tom, we can see a lot of amazing insights coming out of the recent research, and it's providing an opportunity for a lot of families to continue to manage and reevaluate as we work through the pandemic. And I think one point that Tom mentioned, which is quite pertinent, is that we are still continuing. This isn't a historical event that we're reflecting on. It's something that we continue to work through on a daily basis. And through the Global Centre, we speak with a lot of families across the globe. And it's very interesting to often see the different stages that different families in different regions are at. And I think today's panelists will be a great cross-section of many of the opportunities and many of the challenges that are being faced by business families across the region, and will hopefully provide some great insights to the audience. We will run through some topics now, as Harish mentioned at the opening, but there is also a Q&A function within the WebEx for you to include your questions, and I'll do my best to include these within the discussion, and then we do have some time allocated at the end of the panel to go through these questions in detail. So please use the Q&A function within the WebEx and submit any questions that come up, either based on the presentation you've just seen or through the discussions that we undertake. So with that, I would like to introduce just briefly the panelists. As Harish mentioned, we have a great mix today across generations, across industries, and across various experiences. So Nizam Kala, Managing Director of Amka Products, a second generation family business started by his brother and his father 64 years ago, focusing on skincare, hair care, fragrances, home care products. Mr. Mohammad Batterjee, Managing Director of Batterjee Pharma and the board member of Batterjee Holdings. Again, a member of the board, chair of the investment committee, family council member. So we'll pick up on some of these discussions around the various roles and responsibilities. A diverse combination of industries with over 30 businesses from the pharmaceutical sector, the medical sector, domestic products, construction, clothing, food and beverages. Third, we have Faisal Fawaz, the director and chairman of Avarna Ventures. Again, another second generation family member who succeeded from his father, now working with his two brothers within the business, another conglomerate of 12 verticals within their business, one of which being focused heavily on manufacture and distribution in the umbrella and the sector. And lastly, Mr. Mohammed Al Fahim, the Group Head of Business Development at Al Fahim, based out of the UAE, a third-generation family member leading acquisitions of new ventures within the group. And we'll touch on this, but a very interesting time across the region and across the world in terms of business development and looking for new opportunities, and something we've seen a lot of business families focus on. Again, a business focused across automotive, real estate, energy, hospitality, and travel. So many of the sectors are covered here today, and it's a great opportunity to have these discussions. I'll start with a more open-ended question, and appreciating the level of diversification that many of your family enterprises have and the impact the pandemic has had. Whilst varied amongst sectors, we've seen a lot of commonalities. So I'll ask each of the panelists just to introduce themselves briefly, but talk to the main impact that you've seen on your business in the last 12 to 18 months. So I'll start with you, Nizam.
Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel here. And MCA is a family-owned business, and as you said, we're operating for 64 years, but we export into about 64 countries, marketing and 20 leading brands and manufacturing over 750 products. The key business drivers in our business is entrepreneurial flair, professional management, world-class systems, strong brand building expertise. And I think the very important issue is to be very innovative, creating a winning team spirit, harnessing and collecting and the collective genius of all our employees, and having a long-term strategy.
Thank you for that. That's and I think that brings up
a quick background. Do you want me to cover the?
No, I think that's a great introduction to start, and we'll pick up some of those themes throughout. So thank you. I'll pass over now to you, Mohammed Bataji.
Thank you, Daniel, for the introduction, and glad to be with everyone here. I think there are a few challenges that we have faced in the last period. The highest of which is the level of uncertainty on different aspects. So whether it is supply chain, whether it is regarding the people, their availability, recruitment plan, their connection with their families in their countries, so payments, etc. So what I would like to say that the most important challenge has been uncertainty on different aspects, and the main goal during the last period was how we can improve the level of assurance on the different aspects. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. And I think that theme of uncertainty, like you said, much of the work that we do with families and the conversations we have is around using governance both in the business and the family to try and increase that level of certainty. So I think there's some very good topics there that we can discuss during today's panel. Faisal, passing over to you.
Yeah, hi Daniel, thank you, and good evening and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, just to kind of quickly brief about us, we're a family business over 45 years, our ventures, and we've been very entrepreneurial throughout. Our roots are manufacturing, and in the last 3 decades, we've really diversified into multiple business verticals. The pandemic really threw us in the edge. Definitely, it was completely no one ever fathomed. So it really brought us so many uncertainties. We went through 3 lockdowns with multiple challenges. But I mean, reflecting back, I think it's a people that has been our strength, and I think right throughout we've really managed to really connect with everyone, go down to really understanding what's really what their fears are and what's really driving them, and being able to harness every bit of it in a way that is making sure that their well-being is looked after while the company is also really, taken care of. I mean, it has changed us immensely in the last year and a half. I mean, from where we were to where we are today, from remote working to focusing on cash, building agility across businesses. I mean, reflecting back, if you asked me 2 years ago, would you have done a lot of these things? I would say no way. But today, I think we just kind of cruise through that entire challenge. So I would look at it as in a lot of it, I say it's like a huge opportunity to get things that we would have never got done. So thank you.
I think it's interesting, and it ties in obviously to what Tom and Anurag were mentioning around that social responsibility strategy. I think the support of employees and the role within stakeholders was something that was very important to a lot of families, especially in those initial moments of uncertainty that Mohammed was mentioning just before. So I think as an accelerator to many options and decisions, it was large. So I'm looking forward to unpicking some of those topics. And lastly, Mohammed Al Fahim, just passing to you.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, yep, perfect.
So my role is Group Head of Business Development. I'm sort of in charge of finding new opportunities for the group and expanding the verticals that we have. And unfortunately, the pandemic has caused us to sort of rethink that strategy and sort of focus internally more. So what we've done is basically we've looked at areas where we can sort of create the most impact that could actually generate something at the end of it. For example, we've looked at several ways where we could sort of apply digital transformation and realize that is something that we sort of need. And then we also looked at things where our suppliers, our banks, are a lot of these areas which were paper-based, but now sort of converted into sort of digital. So overall, obviously market trends, the uncertainty, the sentiment of everything, all the negative and everything, we realized is our strength was our resilience, to be honest with you, because we managed to grow. We're a service provider. And during that time, a lot of people don't want to use our services, but we managed to sort of swim against the tide and go through it. So we realized our resilience is our strength.
No, thank you. And I think that that word of resilience is something that has echoed through so many conversations. And I think there's so many characteristics of family businesses that build off that resilience, that long-term approach, that sense of community and that focus on the positives as well. I know when we spoke leading up to this, you mentioned that idea of maintaining that positive outlook and looking for the opportunities rather than getting bogged down in the challenges. And I think that with that, it breeds a culture of growth and resilience. So
yes.
Thank you. Again, we can pick up some of those in the discussions. So moving to our first kind of topic, which is around the future of work. Nizam, I want to come back to you. And we saw a variety of employee actions that Anurag and Tom mentioned around reducing hours, around flexible working, and even just around managing and motivating staff. With over 1,400 employees across your business, how have you managed this?
So from our point, we have about 10 different facilities. We occupy about 70,000 meters of space, right? And the key during this challenge was how do we ensure business continuity, mitigate risks for our employees, being that might be absent due to infection or might be quarantined. So our biggest concern was how would we manage closing a shift or a production line or factory or even a section of the business. And the way we wanted to respond, or the way we responded to this, we employed another 500 people on top of the 1,400 people we have currently employed, and we trained them, and we doubled the number of teams, having a backup team. So we had always a COVID team to always come in, a backup team that if there was a COVID team that got, infected, we built up redundancy to overcome any loss in manpower. And this enabled us to ensure, and then we ensured that we most of at least some 50% of our employees had to work from home, and then and the others, we only had 50% coming into the office. So this resulted in us servicing the market. All operations ran smoothly. We protect our service. We ensure that we protect our service levels to our customers. We were blessed, and none of our operations had closed down. And we ensured that we upskilled. And if you look at the future, we're saying, what is it all about? We're saying upskilling and training our staff, decentralizing decision making, ensuring that our employees become decision makers. And then what we did is we see a mix of employees working on site and from home. And then the future, we're saying people will be paid for results, for tasks completed, but not on the hours based on, not on working hours. And how we see this is people working full-time, freelance, and having contract workers on site. So these are the different ways we manage the process and how we see going forward.
No, thank you for that. And I think even the act of increasing your workforce by 35% during the pandemic is just a phenomenal achievement. But it comes back to, like you said, there was a level of quality that you wanted to uphold, but there was also a level of certainty you wanted to provide both to your staff and to your customers. And I think that level of commitment to those aspects is very admirable. So thank you for sharing that. Mohammed Badaji, I wanted to kind of pick up one of your earlier comments there about that clarity and certainty in the context of your employees. How did you manage that, or how did you look to provide that level of clarity?
Thank you, Daniel, for the question. I think it has been, as we say, the challenging moment, and still we are in the process. So whatever we have done or whatever we are trying to do, we still cannot claim that it has been successful, but I believe it is a continuous process. Definitely we have learned a lot from. So we wanted to do different activities in order to reduce the level of uncertainty on different levels, improve the level of assurance on different levels as well. So one of the things regarding the employees, it was very important to improve the level of trust. Of course, one of the things were the assurance that no layoffs will be done, no reduction on the salaries will be made, because we understand that many of them have been responsible for even supporting other families that they went through difficult challenges during the pandemic. I believe that this move was necessary, but I believe is still also not enough, because the amount of pressure, the level of pressure that everyone has gone through is immense. People have been away from their families, people have been away from their friends. The inability to communicate has played a big hit on everyone. And again, different measures of how to improve the level of mutual trust between the organization and the team is an ongoing process in order to ensure that. On other aspects, we have also conveyed the message that this year is not like any other year. There is no need to pressure ourselves with looking for results, looking for bottom line, but let us focus more on doing the best that we can do. Let us, we believe the results will come, but it is just like a student who is preparing for their exams. Let us do the best work, do everything as we usually do it, try to improve it, and then the results will come. because with the pandemic, with the changes, with the uncertainty, there has been a very high level of frustration. You work on something, but then it doesn't end up like you wish it to happen. So there has been a huge effort to ensure that we focus on what we do in our day-to-day. If we do every day what we are supposed to do, then we should be feeling satisfied and happy. There has been a lot of pressure during the pandemic on many people on what they are achieving, what they are not achieving. So we were trying to work around that. I can't claim that we have been successful, but it's still an ongoing process. And we hope that we can learn something today from everyone to answer a very important question: how we can improve the level of trust between the organization and the people who are the main part of this organization. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think that focus on the holistic approach and actually appreciating the external factors. I mean, it's similar to what Nizam was mentioning as well, in the sense that this is about appreciating that this is an abnormal time and that people shouldn't try to kind of react in a normal way and not acknowledge many of the issues that we're all facing mentally, emotionally, physically. So I think that's very powerful. Thank you. Faisal, I want to come across to you now in the sense of, you talked about kind of the pandemic coming up and obviously being something that was not something that anyone had planned for. It wouldn't have been on many risk registers across the boardrooms of many business families. But how have you managed, I guess, building off what Mohammed was saying there, the physical and the mental well-being of your staff, and how have you managed that process overall? So you're still on mute at the moment. Perfect.
Yeah. So looking back, so Sri Lanka has been having continuous economic disruptions over the last 3 decades, and I've gone through. I've been growing up through a war for 3 decades. Post that, we've been having multiple. Every time we thought things were going right, it was not right. And then just a year before the whole pandemic started, we had the Easter bombings, which again shocked the entire country. So I think we've been going through this whole uncertainty and this whole kind of how to respond and things to kind of, when something happens, like, okay, let's look at what we can do immediately and get back. I mean, so it really prepared us to a great extent when the pandemic came in. As a business, we were relatively prepared, not for the pandemic per se, but for the uncertainty in a way. But the pandemic posed us a lot more different challenges, particularly that we weren't able to move out, be able to interact, run our operations. So we had to figure everything out really fast. And as we go, and making sure that we keep the safety in mind of everyone who's working for us, not only us, but the public, the community, where our factories are. So it was a whole lot of things to grapple, I mean, very fast, very soon. One of the things, reflecting back, what we did was we immediately got on online. We had the teams, all of the necessary Zoom meetings, and I think we immediately managed to kind of make sure, give the assurance to our team to say, okay, we are behind, we are there, we are going to look after everything that's going to go on, and really take one-on-ones, conversations with the team to assure that things are going to be okay. Let's all figure out and have those conversations that are very meaningful. When I say that, what is important for them and the business. So whether it may be to tackle and open the factory and run, and what we need to do, to even if we have multiple businesses, they all run independently, and some businesses have to take hard decisions, like, okay, are we going to take a pay cut? How long are we going to take? So we let everyone take, and we got them to come back, and we encouraged and we engaged with them. And I think over the year, I think we were able to battle through it. And at the end of it, we were able to give back everything that people compromised for on behalf of the business. I mean, that's the greatest win. And I think the crisis has brought us together more closer. It's a lot of reflection as to what is important to you as individuals. I mean, we saw our children, our families all grapple through this time, being at home. So it's the same with everyone. And I think that empathizing opportunity with everyone was, I think, a huge win.
I think that's a great point, because that we talked about the acceleration that COVID brought, but it was also a amplifier of many of these relationships. And so by having that opportunity to empathize and to connect with our employees, our employers, our community, I agree, those relationships that were good became better. And we also saw those that where there was issues, they were probably amplified as well. I want to pick up that theme and come to you, Mohammed Al Fahim, around that transformation and diversification conversation. So we've talked about the role of kind of understanding the opportunities and looking outwards to the market. But I know you mentioned some work around how you actually reevaluated your existing operations and businesses as well. So when we talk about that transformation piece, how have you approached that as a family?
So what we've done is, obviously our first concern was the well-being of the staff, and without that we wouldn't be existing, to be honest with you. And so we tried to sort of contain them as strong as possible, because we wanted them to realize that we're here for you, we're going to stand with you, we're going to be with you all the way. And echoing to what Faisal was saying, you have to train, you have to do this, you have to sort of create the harmony. And where we were hit, and unfortunately, it was the industry of the hospitality, and it was, I think, across the globe, it was a blanket hit with everyone. So what we tried to do is be a little bit more humane about it, and then say to the staff, look, unfortunately, we cannot expect guests in the hotels and resorts that we have, but you can still stay without certain benefits such as the salary, but housing, internet, because that's the only way they can communicate with their families. Food, accommodation, all will be for free until things work out well. And we did some restructuring with the positions as well. So overall, what we tried to do is streamline things and sort of try to avoid the sort of determination of staff, because at the end of the day, we realized it's not their fault. It's not a performance-based issue. It's not an issue which we can sort of use that as against them. But no, we said we try to contain it as much as possible and try to find ways out of it. And unfortunately, a lot of the entities that sort of worked with us were very sort of strong with that. For example, the oil and gas companies, we have to send staff to the fields, and we can't, unfortunately. So the oil and gas companies worked with us and saying, look, we can do everything online, we can do this and that. So gladly, we sort of managed to sort of contain that. But unfortunately, yes, as many companies, there's so much of load that we can take, and then people sort of say, look, we got to move on, we got to go somewhere else. It's a natural cycle.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's it's one of those realities that you can't ignore. And I think that's important, that at the end of the day, many of these family businesses have that level of empathy, but they also have that level of business. I mean, at the end of the day, business acumen and running these businesses long term provides a great benefit to the community, to the country, to future employees. So there is that awareness. And I think, can you touch on that in the sense of, we talked about the operations and in particular the automotive industry, and you talked about your digitization approach to that, using this as an opportunity to potentially accelerate those conversations. How was that thought process in terms of that digitization transformation piece?
So what we've done is basically we realized that a lot of people with the pandemic, have sort of obviously got no access to the outside world except the internet. So we embarked on, with the digital transformation, it's just to sort of cut the fat out of the systems that we don't need, cut the fat out of the systems that we sort of don't actually apply to us, and focus on more be customer centric. So what we did was we went above and beyond. We invested and reinvested in our digital platforms, especially for the automotive businesses, so that people can actually sort of engage with us without actually being on floor with us. So, and as well as the payment security and everything. So we've created that, but then thankfully, culturally in this region, I think people like to interact a lot. So our investment paid off because a lot of people decided to walk into our showrooms and say, look, I want this. So it's not a lost investment. It's a good investment, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the cultural factor around here that people like to just be face to face a lot and sit a lot with us.
Mm-hmm. And I think it ties in again to that competitive advantage of these businesses that are operated by these business families have a personality per se, in terms of there's a sense of who the family is and how the businesses operate that attracts customers to feel that level of comfort in dealing with them. So to go fully digital potentially is counterintuitive, but obviously there's efficiencies and requirements that come with it.
Absolutely.
I think Mohammed Badaji, I want to come to you in the sense of, when we talk about this investment, one of the things you mentioned when we spoke was around, especially within the pharma business, that continued investment and focus. And what was the thought process behind that in a time where potentially many businesses were holding off on those investments or waiting? How did you approach that?
Well, I think it has been an important part of reducing uncertainty and assuring people, but also believing that these are essential investments that we need to do for the future. Our industry is not an industry where any investment happened today, we cannot see the results except within 3-4 years, whether it is a development of a new product or an additional line, etc. So all of these investments on all the different aspects, whether it is software, hardware, new products, etc., are necessary for the continuity and for the future of the organization. And we have got all the support from the board members regarding this. And we have decided to continue. Again, as we said, it was not a year where we wanted to look at the bottom line. It was not a year where anyone expected any profit. So we have decided that we will proceed and go ahead with our investments for the future. And things are continuing and things are going on. And I think this is one of the things for many family businesses is the long-term view. They understand that they are the continuation of the founders, maybe 50, 60, or 100 years ago. And we are just custodians. We need to do what we do to continue this organization, to hand it over to our children and grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting in the chat section as well. We've just had a comment come in from Tamali, who is our family business leader in Sri Lanka, and she mentioned the two kind of aspects that you touched on there in terms of the role of the family in dealing with these and making these decisions, but also the speed of these decisions and being able to approach them with a sense of urgency, but also a sense of long-term outlook. And I think that's very powerful. Conscious of time, and we always start these with great intentions, but the conversation is too rich to cover everything. I want to move across to our third section now around social responsibility, and I'll start with you, Faisal, and then come to you, Nizam. the whole idea of ESG and social responsibility has been a huge aspect, and we saw that in Tom and Anurag's presentation. But Faisal, in terms of that social responsibility piece, one, I guess, can you talk to the role of the different generations? But also, you mentioned that the consulting practice that you built, which I found was fascinating. So just something on that, please.
Yeah. So I grew up around my dad, who always believed that giving back was a big part of who we are, our responsibility to community, and making sure that everyone around us are equally good as how we grow. And I think as a practice, as a family, giving back every year and being really involved in giving back is a huge part. And I mean, in the same philosophy, halfway through, I think one of the things when I started the business, we wanted to see how we can give back in a way that is really trending at that time, really environment. This was almost a decade ago. So me and a friend of mine, we both had the passion for environment, and we ended up really starting to see how we can really grow a massive amount of trees, like almost about 150,000 hectares. And we kind of sat and went through, and we learned over the next year so much about it, and we ended up starting a business around it on how to really how to advise people on how environmentally conscious we should be. And looking back in the last decade, I think we really and our strength was corporate. So what we wanted to do was not to get into government or any other area, but to really impact corporates and as to how they can be more environmentally conscious and more aligned. And then we built a practice, and I think today we are one of the most successful consulting companies in sustainability and carbon mitigation around the region. And it was a passion project that we just started, and we used to put our pocket money every month just to pay our salaries. But today I think we've made a great one, and I think the impact we've made around organizations is huge. And it's a huge sense of satisfaction, purely because I think if we don't look after everything and people around us, I don't think we are really able to build a future for everything, our children, or what we are really working hard for. We're not going to take any of this. We're going to leave it and go. And I think it's our responsibility to make sure that what we do remains and passes on to the next. I mean, the idea of family business is to make it go generations, right? And if we don't protect things around us, I think we are really really not doing the sole purpose of what we're doing. Passing a business is one, but making sure everything around it also is handed over in a sustainable manner is something that I think we should really think through. Yeah.
No, I completely agree, and I think it picks up actually some of the questions that are coming through in the Q&A as well around that generational transition and how the businesses are going to be shaped going forward. And to your point on the ESG aspect of it and that consulting distance, it's amazing to see the commercial side of ESG. I think that is something that some families and some businesses think that the two things are separate. I run my business here and I do good things for ESG over here. But what we're seeing more and more with our conversations with families is that those two things really go together. And there's a huge commercial imperative around focusing on many of these passions and many of these environmental and social aspects. So thank you for sharing that. Nizam, I want to come to you just again, building off what Faisal was saying around social responsibility, and I guess your approach to that. How have you found that evolve over the last 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, so basically, we're doing a lot of training, and our purpose as a business is to enrich people's lives. And we have an academy, which is the Soft and Free Academy and the Health and Beauty Academy. And we constantly educating people who have no educational qualification. a diverse group of students from various backgrounds, physically challenged, in some cases blind and disabled. And we find their natural talent and we coach them and train them, and they flourish at the academy. And this basic training and specialized training gives them the confidence to add value to their families and their communities. Over this period, there were about 24,000 hairdressers and beauticians graduating over the period with nationally recognized qualifications at various skills levels. And we find our graduates become entrepreneurs, employed in salons, and they have a sustainable income for their families. And when we visited some of, our field technicians go out and visit our graduates, reinforce what they've learned at the academy, and upskill them. So we believe that training and development and education is critical, especially in Africa. We've done a lot of in-house training in terms of adult basic education and training. We do sponsoring, we do learnership programs such as training people in chemical operations, internships, and we believe that at least 1 to 5 days of training for all our employees is critical. And then obviously supporting various social organizations. We talked of training and education, but community development is critical, social upliftment, empowering small and micro enterprises. So overall, we feel that contributing for the benefit of humankind is critical. And as Faisal was saying, that ultimately it's not for one generation, it's multi-generational. So our whole vision is to look beyond a generation. Thank you.
Again, thank you. I think that it shares some great insights and perspectives that I think many of the audience can take with them as they consider their approach to these issues. I want to move to the final section now, and Mohammed Al Fahim, I'll come to you because there's a couple of questions in the Q&A as well that tie in, and I saw actually my good friend Bob Coley has put a question in on family governance, and this will be the section that we'll cover now. And there was some questions around the resilience that you mentioned in your introduction, but how governance has shaped that and the role that governance is playing. So can you share a little bit around that aspect of the business and how the family has developed its governance to support much of what you're trying to achieve?
So yeah, thank you, Tony, for that. So what we've done is a while back, actually I can show you. So I don't know if people can see. So what we've done is something called our protocol. And the thick book basically explains a lot of the family governance in this little baby over here. It took us about, I think, about a year and a bit, and it was very, very tough. It was very, very sensitive because it all spoke about, how do you sort of shift from one thinking hat to another, but in a family perspective. You've got cousins, you've got other cousins, you've got brothers, you've got other brothers, you've got people who don't, aren't aligned and everything. But thankfully, we've managed to put that in a document which allows us to move forward and move ahead. So how does our governance work? It's quite simple. So what we've done is we've created 2 boards, and one is a supervisory board, which allows the owners, so the full owners, to be sort of part in that board. And then we've created a management board which oversees the business. So one has a direct relationship to the business and one has an indirect relationship to the business. So the supervisory board, yes, it has 2 people from, 1 person from, like, for example, each board and everything, but not all of them in that. So what they do is they sort of oversee what the management is doing, and they provide them with sort of guidance, provide them with solutions, suggestions, and so forth. So that in reality helped us actually move faster than what we expected. And to be honest with you, it has put us in a position where we thought that we would never be in. And that is the ability to sort of understand the business more with the family members who are not involved. And the family members who are involved, there's only 2, to be honest with you. And that's myself and my sister who's in HR. But that is on a sort of GM level. So what we've done is that allows us to interact with the other cousins, the other family members who want to contribute to the business and allow us to sort of grow and explore opportunities with us. So for example, if you tell us 5 years back, would you be interested in fintech? We'd say no. Now, if you ask us, would you be interested in fintech? We'd say probably yes. So the mode of the business changed, the theme of the business has changed, the thinking has all sort of created a sort of we circumnavigated sort of the new world of the business. So that corporate governance is a key for businesses, and I think I would suggest that family businesses look into that. And you know, traditionally, yes, things work. You know, father, grandfather, father, son, etc. But then again, it just extends. So
yes.
So that is my.
No, thank you, and that picks up two other questions in the Q&A, and please keep sending them in if you have questions. But Ravi Chandran had two questions. One was around the role of the second and third generation as they come into the business, and you mentioned kind of that evolution, but also that structure and clarity. But one thing I wanted you to touch on, which I really liked when we spoke, was around the 3G board and the board within the third generation as something that you had established, particularly to his question there about how do you engage them within the business.
Yes, so I'll just touch on that quickly, so with the respect of time. So what we've done is the supervisory board, or the corporate governance manual that we've got, we've created a third generation board. So a lot of the families, family businesses, or us as a family, what we've found is there is people with certain skills that we can use and utilize, whether it's entrepreneurial skills, whether it's business skills, finance skills, probably HR skills, which we don't know about. So it was a democratic nomination. So everyone just puts a name and everyone decides on it, and it just tallies whoever wins. So so people got chosen based on the nominations on the voting. So this board, what it was, is basically to sort of introduce the third generation into the business without actually sort of you know, doing a crash course into the business. So what they did is, let's assume that I wanted to create an industrial laundromat, and I want someone to support my business. So I would present that to the third generation board. They would look into it, because everyone sitting on the other across me of the table has the same rights as I do. So there's no difference between myself or my other cousin, because we both share the same rights. So they keep on Q&Aing me and everything until we reach sort of an agreement of how we can sort of adopt that industrial laundromat. So phase 2 comes in, which is basically the financing of it. So I put in some equity. The family business, the Al-Fahim group, if I can say, puts in the equity, and then we grow together until I reach certain growth. I can pay back the business, the Al-Fahim group, and I just can sort of, you know, fly on my own. That by itself, it gives the group or the family members, the second generation, comfort that, look, we've invested in this person, he's paid back, he's been successful in this business, let's do more of this. So that was the part of the reason of why we created the third generation board.
No, thank you. And I think it is, like you said, it has so many outcomes and so many opportunities to engage the next generation, but to understand the role and the responsibilities that they have based on their level of involvement. Because I see this a lot with the families I work with. The role of an owner comes with it certain roles and responsibilities, which is different to that of a board member, which is different to that of potentially a CEO running the business day to day. So setting those boundaries is quite powerful. Mohammed Bataji, I wanted to come to you. I know when we spoke as a family of over 100 individuals, kind of keeping that social connection is important, but also managing the roles, even with your role managing the business. One question that's come into the Q&A is around the evolution of whether businesses are family owned and family run, or that they're family owned but potentially run by professional management. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on those 2 points. One around engaging the wider family, and then around the role of family within management and what you're seeing in that aspect.
Okay, let me start by the second question. I would say that the family involvement is very high, but to have it to this level, we need to make sure that they are well prepared and at the highest level of professionalism as possible. If we look back at the history of this family enterprise, we see, sorry, just 1 second. We see that our great-grandfather, who has started the business in 1908, he was an orphan, but started the business and started to invest all of his income in the education of his children. So my grandfather, he finished his primary school in Saudi, but then he went to continue his education abroad and came back with a bachelor degree from the UK in the 40s. So the importance of education, the importance of training has been one of the essence of this family enterprise. And we believe that if we keep investing and keep developing our family members and ensuring that they go through each step of the business and not jump immediately to the top, that they will be excellent stewards for this family business. That doesn't mean management is only from family members. It is always a combination. Always it is for who better suits the position, but we do not say family or professionals, because we believe that family must be professional, and family is not a license to be lazy, but rather is an additional responsibility, because each and every action of a family member has a high level of scrutiny, whether from other family members, but also from other colleagues and employees. A family member who is lazy, they say he is lazy because he's a family member. So we believe that we put a lot of importance and a lot of emphasis on preparing, on ensuring that each one of them has, after they receive their proper education and continue their education, because education is a continuous, non-ending process.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like to brag, but also to be inspired by the story of my grandma, who didn't receive formal education initially because of the inavailability during her time for this. But then after she had her third child, she went to continue her education until she received her PhD. So it gives all of us an inspiration on the importance of being prepared, on the importance of learning,
Mm-hmm.
and on the additional responsibility that we have as family members. But again, we always like to combine it between family and non-family.
Mm-hmm. I think
the other point,
I just that's okay. No, I'm just conscious of time. I just wanted to pick up. There's some really good messages there around. One question that had come in the Q&A was about the legacy and documenting the history of the family. And I think the story you mentioned there about your grandmother and those are very powerful stories to share. So I think to answer that question to the audience, I think by documenting those stories and bringing those up, it becomes very powerful. So I thank you for sharing that. And I think how you've incorporated that continuous learning and development. There's a whole nother session we could do on remuneration of family members. You talk about the increased pressure that comes with being a family member within a role. I've had many discussions about, does that come with an increased salary because more responsibility? Does it come with a decreased salary because you're a family member? Or does it come with a market salary? And I'm sure that's a whole nother session we could have. But I am conscious of time. Just one very last question, and Faisal, I'll come to you. Just hopefully it's not too hard, but one of the questions that had come through the Q&A was around dealing with family members who wish to potentially exit the business, and having that discussion. Is that something that you've seen within your business or that you've discussed as a family?
Well, we're still very early on this, but we've kind of touched upon, and I think it's more about listening to each one, every member's needs, and being able to embrace it, and be able to take a conversation around it. I mean, I think the more important thing we discussed was to give him the priority about what he wants to do next, and be able to encourage and support him while making sure the business moves. And we've had that discussion, but to be honest, how are we going to support that? How are we going to fill that gap? Maybe they will. We have to make those decisions at the time based on what's available around.
Yes, yeah. I think more discussions to come, but it ties to that point about this being an evolution. Look, I could continue with these questions for another hour. I think it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you all for your contributions, both the audience in the Q&A and the 4 panelists here. It's been a pleasure to work with you and prepare for this. So thank you for your insights. Thank you for your time. But I'll pass over now to Fawad, who will have some closing remarks. But a big thank you again, and hopefully the audience has enjoyed it as much as I have.
Thank you, Daniel, and our panelists on this insightful discussion. I'm having a problem with my camera, so apologies for that. I must say there is a lot to unpack here, Daniel, with the learnings and insights which our panelists have shared with our audience. And as we are coming closer to concluding today's webinar, maybe I'll quickly recap the key takeaways from today's session on how families have reacted to this pandemic across various stages. The first phase being the initial shock of the pandemic, where family businesses had to react quickly to protect their businesses from sudden revenue declines during the early and highly unpredictable months of the pandemic. We also call this as the reaction phase. Then came the resilience phase, where family businesses revived their perseverance
I think Fawad may have been disconnected, so I'm not sure if he's going to rejoin. But just to bring this in, and Tom, Anurag, Harish, please join me if you want to work through this as Fawad comes back. But it picks up on some of the themes he was mentioning there around the way in which the families reacted initially, the way in which they made some of those short-term actions, and we talked about the business actions, employee actions, and even some of the corporate actions taken. And the last section, I think, ties into some of the questions that had come through in the conversation as well, and in the Q&A about the adaptation of the strategies. This wasn't a pick a strategy and continue it through for the entire session. What we saw even in today's discussion was elements of all 3 strategies being applied at different points throughout the conversation. So I think really in terms of those takeaways, we look to see how people adapt based on the external and the internal factors. And I think if you go to the next slide, we see some of the questions that have been posed, and some of the questions I think we can each take away within our own operations and our own families to understand how we assess the role of the family, assess the way in which we approach our strategy moving forward, and the way in which we look to make these changes again as we continue to work through the current situation. So I know that that was similar in my conversations with Fawad. It's a similar conversation to what you see on the screen, but Tom, do you have any thoughts as well on this?
Yes, thanks, Daniel. I think you've summed it up really well. I guess if I had to pick one of these areas which I'm seeing as a priority at the moment, is most of my clients are definitely focusing on the ESG agenda. That seems to be very top of mind. And then I think the second point is something which Anurag covered earlier, which is diversifying family wealth. I think where there is one core business and perhaps some of the risks of that business have been identified as part of the pandemic, then many families are looking to look at other areas, other markets. But also I think if they are a third or fourth generation business and the family has grown, and therefore the business needs to fund that wider family, then there is a great deal of reflection around how they manage that wider shareholder base and what they need to do to ensure that all of the stakeholders buy into the strategy for the business for the future.
Yes.
So I think, Daniel, as you said earlier, this isn't a, as we say, a one size doesn't fit all. I also think this is very much a journey. We are still on the journey. Things are still uncertain and insecure. But I think the positive thing, as we said at the very beginning, is that the DNA of family business allows family business to be in a great position to take advantage of the economic recovery as it starts to take shape.
No, I agree. And the slides and the recording as well are being shared. So I encourage people to reflect on this as they look back. But I'll pass over to Harish now just to close off today's session.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Tom and Fuad, for those closing remarks. With that, we come to the end of the webinar and would like to thank you all for taking time and who have joined us for today's session. In case you need the Global Family Business Survey report, or if you need any other assistance from our side, we'll be sharing what you see on the screen. The contacts are here. You may touch base with us and we'll help you with that. Many thanks to all the speakers, the panel speakers who have taken time and joined us today for this session. Again, a special thanks to the MESA office and KPMG Markets team who arranged this webinar. Thank you all, and we look forward to arranging a physical conference, hopefully soon. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you, Harish. Thanks.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.